The chains tightened before the sentence was spoken. Steel echoed through the abandoned fortress as Alpha King Victor Ashenfang was forced onto one knee, surrounded by enemy warriors whose glowing eyes never left him. A masked commander stepped forward. The execution will take place at tomorrow's moonrise. No rescue, no negotiation, no second chance. The fortress gates slammed shut. Victor had less than 24 hours to live. Yet what unsettled him most was not the approaching execution. It was the banner hanging above the enemy council, a silver crescent moon, the very same symbol embroidered onto the simple cloak his Luna insisted on wearing whenever she disappeared from the palace to visit the forgotten. He had mocked that symbol countless times. Tomorrow, it might become the last thing he ever saw. Before the story continues, subscribe if you enjoy emotional werewolf romance stories where impossible love, ancient bonds, and unexpected redemption reshape entire kingdoms. Your support helps bring more unforgettable Alpha King adventures to life. Only the previous morning, the royal court had celebrated another military victory. Nobles raised crystal goblets. Generals praised Victor's strength. The great hall echoed with applause. Only one chair remained quiet. Naomi sat beside the throne wearing her familiar blue-gray dress instead of jeweled royal robes. While everyone else celebrated conquered territory, she quietly folded a list of widows, wounded soldiers, and orphaned children who still needed help before winter arrived. Lord Magnus laughed loudly enough for the entire court to hear. "Our Luna mourns harder than our enemies." Several nobles joined his laughter. Victor smiled faintly. He did not defend her. He simply leaned closer and whispered, "One day, you must allow the kingdom to celebrate victory." Naomi looked toward the palace windows. Victory means very little if another child cries because of it. Victor had no answer. Hours later, he departed for a secret peace negotiation near the northern border. He expected difficult conversations. He never expected betrayal. The ambush came before sunset. Now, bound inside an enemy fortress, the Alpha King stared once more at the silver crescent banner swaying gently above the stone chamber, and wondered why his enemies guarded it with the same reverence his Luna always had. Long before anyone called her the Luna of Ironclaw, Naomi had already become the keeper of names no one else wished to remember. Every dawn began the same way, before servants awakened the palace, before generals unfolded campaign maps, before nobles debated taxes and victories. Naomi quietly wrapped herself in a plain blue-gray cloak, fastened the small silver crescent pendant around her neck, and slipped through the eastern gate, with only healer Miriam beside her. No royal escort, no banners, no applause. She preferred it that way. The first stop was never the marketplace. It was the Street of Ashes, a forgotten district where dozens of war widows struggled to survive inside weathered stone cottages that winter winds entered more easily than sunlight. Naomi knew every door, every face, every child's name. She carried flour instead of jewels, medicine instead of perfume, blankets instead of silk. An elderly woman smiled weakly as Naomi entered carrying fresh bread. "My Luna, you should not come yourself." Naomi knelt beside her. "If I stop coming, who will remind you that you are not alone?" The old widow lowered her head to hide her tears. Her husband had died protecting Ironclaw nearly 12 years earlier. The kingdom had celebrated his courage, then forgotten his family. Naomi never had. By midday, she visited the military hospital, not the grand royal infirmary reserved for decorated commanders, the smaller stone building where forgotten soldiers recovered from wounds that would never fully heal. Some had lost their hearing, some their sight, some their ability to walk. Many believed they had become burdens. Naomi believed they remained heroes. She sat beside each bed without haste. She listened longer than she spoke. One veteran apologized for surviving when his younger brother had not. Naomi quietly held his hand. You honored him by coming home. Another confessed he feared his daughter no longer remembered his face. Naomi arranged for an artist to paint his portrait that very afternoon. Children should never lose memories because adults lose wars. Word quietly spread whenever she visited. The atmosphere changed, not because pain disappeared, because despair loosened its grip. Late that afternoon, she walked beyond the city walls. Captain Roland had offered guards countless times. She always declined. Compassion traveled farther without armor. Across the river stood an old stone prison. Most people believed she visited to comfort captured Ironclaw scouts. They never realized she also visited prisoners from rival packs. General Elias once confronted her. My Luna, these wolves marched against us. They killed our people. Naomi nodded. I know. And you still bring them medicine? I bring medicine to human suffering. She entered the prison carrying baskets of food. An elderly prisoner immediately stood, not from fear, from respect. You returned. I promised I would. You owe us nothing. Naomi smiled gently. No promise becomes smaller simply because peace becomes inconvenient. She personally changed bandages, delivered letters to separated families whenever negotiations allowed, ensured every prisoner received blankets before the first snowfall. Some guards quietly questioned her. Others secretly began helping. Compassion, Naomi had learned, spread more quietly than fear, but much farther. Near sunset, she and Miriam traveled beyond the border. Officially, no one knew. Unofficially, entire villages waited. Several harvests had failed across the neighboring Shadow Ridge territories. Children had begun sleeping through hunger because empty stomachs eventually stopped asking. Naomi could not ignore them. She arrived carrying wagons filled with grain purchased from her own private inheritance. Village elders hurried forward. One bowed deeply. My Luna, we cannot repay this. I never asked you to. But we once fought your kingdom. You are feeding children, not armies. The elder looked away, ashamed. You should hate us, Naomi answered softly. If hatred could grow food, I would have planted it years ago. Instead, she planted wheat, hope, and trust. Every sack of grain bore no royal seal, only a small silver crescent stitched by hand. Many assumed it represented the moon. Only a handful knew its deeper meaning, a promise remembered. That evening, while Miriam organized supplies inside a tiny chapel, she discovered an ancient wooden chest hidden beneath loose floorboards. Inside rested a weathered scroll wrapped carefully in faded blue cloth. The parchment crumbled slightly as Naomi opened it. Across the top appeared unfamiliar words, the Moon Covenant Scroll. Miriam whispered, I thought this was only a legend. Naomi carefully continued reading. Most of the ink had faded. Only one passage remained clear. When a Luna keeps faith not only with her own people, but also with those her kingdom calls enemies, the moon shall weave alliances no alpha can conquer through fear. Neither woman spoke. The chapel remained silent except for distant wind moving through broken windows. Finally, Miriam asked, Do you believe it? Naomi slowly rolled the scroll closed. I believe promises change people. If that is prophecy, perhaps prophecy begins with ordinary kindness. They returned to Ironclaw long after darkness covered the roads. The palace celebrated another military success that same evening. Music echoed through the great hall. Crystal glasses shimmered beneath chandeliers. Victor accepted congratulations from nobles. Lord Magnus proudly described enemy casualties. No one noticed the flower dust still clinging to Naomi's sleeves. No one asked why her boots carried dried mud from villages beyond the border. Only Victor glanced toward her. "You missed another celebration," Naomi smiled gently. "I attended something more important." "What could be more important than the victory of your own kingdom?" She looked quietly across the crowded hall. "A mother whose children finally have enough bread," Victor sighed. "You cannot save everyone." "No," she answered without hesitation, "but I can refuse to become someone who stops trying." The music continued. Conversation resumed. The court dismissed her words as another example of impossible compassion. Yet beyond the palace, hundreds of widows prayed for her. Forgotten soldiers found hope because of her. Enemy prisoners remembered dignity because of her. Hungry children survived because of her. And across distant kingdoms, leaders who had once sworn never to trust Ironclaw again quietly preserved every promise Naomi had kept. They never forgot her name, even if her own kingdom still failed to understand it. Far beyond the northern mountains, inside the fortress where Victor remained imprisoned, an elderly enemy chieftain carefully unfolded a faded grain sack marked with the familiar silver crescent. He smiled sadly. The Luna kept her promise. "It is our turn to keep ours, outside." War drums began sounding across the valley, not to begin another conquest, but to answer a debt of mercy that had waited many years to be repaid. Iron chains scraped across the stone floor as dawn crept through the narrow windows of the mountain fortress. Victor Ashenfang had not slept. He had spent the entire night expecting the dungeon door to open, expecting interrogation, expecting humiliation, expecting revenge. Instead, a guard entered carrying a wooden tray, fresh bread, hot stew, clean water. The man quietly placed the meal before the Alpha King. Victor frowned. "You feed your prisoners well," the guard answered calmly. "We feed our guests the way Lady Naomi taught us." Victor slowly looked up. "What did you say?" The guard offered no explanation. He simply bowed his head before leaving. The heavy door closed once again. Victor stared at the untouched meal, Lady Naomi. His enemies knew her name. Hours later, footsteps echoed through the corridor. The prison door opened. Not for an execution, for an invitation. 3 elderly leaders entered the chamber wearing the ceremonial cloaks of rival packs. Each had fought against Ironclaw during different wars. Each had once stood across a battlefield from Victor himself. The oldest introduced himself first. "I am Chieftain Aldrin Greymane," the second nodded. "I am Matriarch Celine Frostbrook." The third placed one hand over his heart. "I am Elder Corvin Blackriver." Victor remained standing. "I expected generals," Aldrin smiled faintly. "We buried too many generals. We brought those who still remember promises." They escorted Victor from the dungeon into an ancient council chamber overlooking the valley. No chains, no guards holding spears against his back, only quiet dignity. A long wooden table waited beside a fire. An empty chair stood at its center. "For me?" Celine nodded. "You are our prisoner, but you are also a king." Victor hesitated before sitting. The table was already prepared. Simple food, fresh fruit, warm tea, no poison, no mockery, only respect. Finally, Victor asked the question that had haunted him since dawn. "Why?" The 3 elders exchanged silent glances. Corvin reached beneath the table. He carefully placed an old silver pendant upon the wood. Victor recognized it immediately. A crescent moon, exactly like Naomi's. His heartbeat slowed. Where did you get this? It belonged to my granddaughter. Victor waited. Corvin's weathered hands trembled slightly. 5 winters ago, our village starved. The river froze. Our crops failed. Our children began dying. He lowered his eyes. We sent pleas for mercy. No kingdom answered. Victor remained silent. Corvin continued. One night, wagons arrived. No soldiers, no banners, only grain, medicine, and blankets. Victor already knew the answer before the old man spoke her name. Lady Naomi. Corvin smiled sadly. She asked for nothing. She only said, "Feed the children first." Silence settled over the chamber. Celine spoke next. My youngest son lost both legs during the Battle of Hollow Ridge. Victor remembered the battle. He had commanded Ironclaw forces that day. He believed his life had ended. No healer would cross the border. Your Luna arrived. Victor looked at her in disbelief. She crossed the border? Repeatedly. She cleaned infected wounds, changed bandages, read stories to frighten children. My son lived because she refused to see enemies. Aldrin quietly unfolded a faded letter. The first peace treaty between our fathers collapsed before the ink dried. Victor nodded. I know. Your Luna honored every promise anyway. He handed Victor the letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, Naomi's. A promise should not die simply because politics failed. Victor read the sentence again. Then again. His hands tightened around the page. He remembered every evening Naomi had returned late. Every celebration she quietly missed. Every argument they had shared. He had believed she wasted precious resources. She had been saving lives. Guilt settled heavily inside him. I never knew. Celine looked directly into his eyes. That is because she never wanted gratitude. She wanted peace. The chamber grew quiet once more. Outside, snow began falling across the mountain pass. Victor walked toward the window. Far below stood dozens of villagers. Children laughed while building snow wolves. An elderly woman noticed him watching. She smiled, then bowed respectfully, not to a conqueror, to Naomi's mate. The realization struck harder than any blade. His authority had earned obedience. Her kindness had earned love. Behind him, Corvin spoke softly. Do you know why no one has harmed you? Victor slowly turned. I assumed political value. The old chief shook his head. No. We protect you, because losing you would break her heart. The words stole Victor's breath. His mate bond stirred deep within his soul. For years it had been steady, comforting, familiar. Now, it awakened with overwhelming force. An invisible warmth surged through his chest. Electric currents raced beneath his skin. His wolf rose inside him with a deep, primal purr unlike anything he had ever experienced. Not because Naomi was nearby, because for the first time, he truly understood who she was. Every forgotten village, every healed soldier, every spared prisoner, every hungry child. The bond between them deepened beyond instinct, beyond destiny, beyond royal duty. It became admiration, reverence, love rediscovered. Victor closed his eyes. I mocked her kindness. Aldrin answered gently. You misunderstood its strength. Another elder entered the chamber in haste. His expression had changed. Urgent. Chieftains? The Brotherhood of the Iron Fang has crossed the Eastern Pass. The room fell silent. They are not coming for us. They are coming for the Alpha King. Victor immediately understood. If he died inside enemy territory, the kingdoms would blame one another. Another generation of war would begin. Corvin looked toward the other leaders. The debt has arrived. Celine nodded. We repay it today. Aldrin turned to Victor. Your Luna once risked everything to save our children. Today, we will risk everything to save her king. Outside, war horns echoed through the mountains. Hundreds of rival warriors began gathering, not to execute the captured Alpha King, but to stand beside him. Because one compassionate Luna had accomplished what no army ever could. She had turned former enemies into willing allies. And somewhere beyond the snow-covered peaks, Naomi suddenly paused during her evening prayers. Her silver moon pendant grew warm against her heart. Without seeing him, without hearing his voice, she knew. Their mate bond had awakened in a way it never had before. Victor finally understood. The first war horn echoed across the mountains. The second answered from the eastern ridge. The third came from somewhere behind the fortress itself. Within moments, the valley trembled beneath hundreds of pounding hooves. Victor stepped onto the fortress walls beside Chieftain Aldrin. Below them, warriors from every rival pack assembled with astonishing speed. Greymane, Frostbrook, Black River, 3 kingdoms that had spent decades fighting Ironclaw. Now they stood together, not against Victor, for him. Snow drifted across the battlefield. No one spoke. Then another banner appeared. Black, silver, a crimson wolf fang slashed across its center. The Brotherhood of the Iron Fang had arrived. Thousands, disciplined, silent. Unlike ordinary soldiers, they carried no kingdom's colors, only hatred. At their front rode Chancellor Dorian Voss. Victor's eyes narrowed. Dorian, Aldrin frowned. Your Chancellor? Victor nodded slowly. He organized the peace summit. Realization swept across the fortress walls. The ambush, the capture, everything. It had never been designed to kill Victor immediately. It had been designed to ensure he died inside enemy territory. The resulting war would consume both kingdoms. Dorian rode forward. His voice rolled across the frozen valley. Deliver the Alpha King. We shall spare your villages. No one answered. He smiled. I expected your stubbornness. Another rider emerged beside him. Warlord Magnus Bloodclaw, Victor's most celebrated battlefield commander. The man who had toasted countless victories inside Ironclaw's palace. Magnus removed his helmet. Forgive me, Your Majesty. I never served peace. I served endless war. Several rival warriors instinctively reached for their weapons. Victor simply watched. Years of misplaced trust unfolded before him. Magnus raised his sword. The Luna infected weak minds with compassion. Today we removed that disease. Behind him, the Brotherhood advanced, step by step. Perfect formation, like a tide of black iron. Captain Roland's voice suddenly echoed from behind. My king! Victor turned sharply. Roland emerged through the fortress gate accompanied by 200 exhausted royal guards. Every one of them had fought through mountain passes to reach him. Roland dropped to one knee. We came as quickly as we could. Victor placed one hand upon his shoulder. You came. We always will. No further words were necessary. The fortress gates opened, not to surrender, to fight. Victor stepped into the snow, alone. He stood halfway between 2 armies. Magnus laughed. You still believe honor matters, Victor answered calmly. I finally understand what does. He looked toward the rival chieftains. I owe you my life, Aldrin shook his head. No. You owe it to Naomi. Those words spread across the valley. Warriors whispered her name. Not with fear, with gratitude. One elderly captain lifted a faded blanket stitched with a silver crescent. She saved my granddaughter. Another held up a weathered loaf pan. She rebuilt our village bakery. A scarred huntress stepped forward. When my son was dying, your Luna carried medicine across the border herself. One voice became 10. 10 became hundreds. Every testimony echoed across the snow. Victor listened in stunned silence. His Luna had quietly built an alliance invisible to every court. No treaty, no army, no throne, only mercy. Dorian's face darkened. Enough. He raised a black crystal above his head. Its surface pulsed with crimson light. The Iron Fang heart, Captain Roland's expression hardened. My king. It feeds upon hatred. Dorian slammed the relic against the frozen ground. Crimson energy burst outward. Snow instantly darkened. Wind screamed. Every Brotherhood warrior inhaled sharply. Their eyes glowed blood red. Their strength multiplied. Several rival soldiers stumbled beneath the crushing pressure. Magnus roared, "Kill them all!" Everything exploded into motion. Steel collided. Snow erupted beneath charging boots. Captain Roland intercepted the first wave. Royal guards locked shields before the fortress entrance. Rival warriors fought beside them without hesitation. Former enemies defended one another instinctively. Victor charged directly toward Magnus. Their swords met with a thunderous impact. Again, again, again. Magnus fought with brutal force. Victor fought with perfect control. "You hesitate," Magnus sneered. "You have grown weak." Victor blocked another strike. "No, I have finally learned restraint." Magnus attacked relentlessly. Heavy blows, wild rage. Victor yielded only enough ground to protect the warriors behind him. Every movement became purposeful, measured, disciplined. Nearby, Dorian raised the Iron Fang heart higher. The crimson aura intensified. Several defenders collapsed under its influence. Even Victor felt the relic reaching toward the anger buried deep within his wolf. Memories surged. Battles, loss, betrayal. The relic invited rage, promised victory. Only one step remained: surrender to hatred. Victor closed his eyes for one heartbeat. Then he remembered Naomi kneeling beside wounded strangers. Naomi carrying bread through winter storms. Naomi smiling at children who had once belonged to enemy packs. The mate bond blazed, warm, steady, ancient. Golden light burst from Victor's chest. His wolf answered with a deep primal purr, not a roar of conquest, a vow of protection. The crimson pressure shattered. Golden energy swept across the battlefield like sunrise. Every defender felt it. Courage replaced fear. The Iron Fang heart cracked. Dorian stared in horror. "No, this power belongs to wrath." Victor looked directly at him. "It belongs to love." A colossal spectral wolf of radiant silver and gold appeared behind the Alpha King. Its luminous eyes overlooked the battlefield. It did not attack. It stood, watching, judging, protecting. The mere presence of the guardian spirit caused the Brotherhood ranks to falter. One assassin dropped his sword. Another removed his mask. Then another. The crimson spell weakened. The Iron Fang heart fractured again. A deafening crack echoed across the valley. The relic exploded into harmless fragments. The unnatural rage vanished instantly. Brotherhood warriors looked around in confusion, awakening as though from a nightmare. Magnus screamed and charged Victor one final time. Victor sidestepped, turned, disarmed him with a single precise movement. Magnus's sword spun through the air before landing deep in the snow. Victor pointed his blade toward the ground. "The battle is over." Magnus collapsed to his knees. Across the battlefield, Brotherhood soldiers began laying down their weapons. Silence spread. The war had ended. Then, an arrow hissed through the stillness, not toward Victor, toward the fortress wall. toward a messenger carrying Naomi's silver crescent banner. Captain Roland shouted, "Your Majesty!" Victor turned just in time to see a hidden assassin emerge from beneath the shattered bridge, drawing a second arrow directly toward the heart of the banner that bore Naomi's symbol. The second arrow never reached the banner. Victor moved before thought. His sword flashed upward, steel met steel. The arrow split cleanly into two harmless pieces that disappeared into the snow. A shadow leaped from beneath the ruined bridge, the final assassin of the Brotherhood. His face remained hidden behind a black iron mask. Unlike every warrior before him, he ignored the Alpha King completely. His true target had never been Victor. He sprinted toward the messenger carrying Naomi's silver crescent banner. If her symbol survives. "Peace survives!" Captain Roland intercepted him. Their blades collided with explosive force. The assassin twisted free and continued forward. Another guard stepped into his path, thrown aside. A rival warrior blocked the next strike, so pushed away. The assassin reached the messenger. Victor arrived at the same instant. The masked killer drove his dagger forward. Victor caught the assassin's wrist with one hand. The poisoned blade stopped only inches from the banner. For a long moment, neither man moved. "You still do not understand," the assassin whispered. "We are not fighting kingdoms. We are killing hope." Victor slowly tightened his grip. "No, you are afraid of it." With one controlled motion, he disarmed the assassin. The dagger fell into the snow. Captain Roland immediately restrained the man without delivering a fatal blow. The final weapon of the Brotherhood had fallen. Silence spread across the valley. Then something unexpected happened. Brotherhood soldiers began removing their masks, one after another, not because they had been defeated, because they were exhausted. An older warrior stepped forward first. "I buried 3 sons. I no longer remember why we started fighting." Another lowered his sword. "My daughter survives because Lady Naomi brought medicine across the border." A third quietly removed the Brotherhood insignia from his cloak. "I cannot raise my grandchildren inside another endless war." The black banners slowly descended. Snow covered them, as though the mountain itself wished to bury hatred forever. Nearby, Chancellor Dorian Voss tried to escape through the eastern pass. Captain Roland and General Elias cut off every path. "There is nowhere left to run," Roland said. Dorian laughed bitterly. "You think kindness won?" "No," General Elias answered. "It simply outlasted your cruelty." Royal guards placed Dorian under arrest. Moments later, Warlord Magnus was also brought forward. His armor was broken, his pride even more so. Victor looked at both men. "You feared compassion because it exposed your greatest weakness," Magnus glared at him. "We feared losing control." Victor nodded slowly. "I know." He lowered his sword. "The war ends today." The rival chieftains approached together. Aldrin, Celine, Corvin. None carried weapons anymore, only the silver crescent banner. Aldrin handed it to Victor. "It belongs with its Luna." Victor accepted it with both hands. The cloth was worn. Several careful stitches repaired old tears. Naomi had mended it herself. His fingers rested upon the familiar embroidery, a simple crescent moon. He finally understood. It had never represented surrender. It represented every promise she had refused to abandon. The journey home began before sunrise. No escort argued. Former enemies traveled beside Ironclaw soldiers as equals. When the royal procession entered the capital, thousands gathered along the streets. They expected victory. Instead, they saw rival leaders walking peacefully beside their Alpha King. Whispers spread through that crowd. Confusion, wonder, hope. Naomi waited at the palace gates. She had not worn a crown, only her familiar blue-gray dress. When she saw Victor, she did not run. She simply smiled with quiet relief. You came home. Victor stopped several steps before her. Blood covered his armor. A deep wound stretched across his ribs where Magnus's final strike had broken through the steel. Only now, with danger gone, did the pain truly arrive. His knees weakened. Before the entire kingdom, Alpha King Victor Ashenfang fell to both knees before his Luna. Blood stained the white stone beneath him. Every noble, every soldier, every citizen watched in complete silence. Victor lowered his head. I thought fear built strong kingdoms. His voice shook. I believed mercy made us appear weak. He looked into Naomi's tear-filled eyes. I was wrong. He held up the silver crescent banner. I crossed battlefields to protect borders. You crossed them to protect people. I earned victories. You earned hearts. Another tear slipped down his face. I laughed when they mocked your kindness. I should have stood beside you. I questioned the woman who had already accomplished what no king ever could. His breathing faltered. I am sorry. I am sorry for every moment I failed to recognize your strength. The palace courtyard remained utterly still. Naomi gently knelt before him. She brushed trembling fingers across the blood on his cheek. There is nothing to forgive. I misunderstood you. You learned. I doubted your compassion. You chose it today. Victor closed his eyes. I almost waited too long. Naomi smiled softly. But you did not. She embraced him. The Alpha King rested his forehead against hers. The mate bond glowed with quiet warmth, not because destiny demanded it, because respect had finally become complete. Around them, soldiers lowered their heads. Many openly wept. Even General Elias quietly wiped tears from his face. After several moments, Victor slowly rose. He turned toward the assembled court. Bring Chancellor Dorian Voss. Bring Warlord Magnus Bloodclaw. The prisoners stood before the throne, broken, defeated, expecting execution. Victor spoke clearly enough for the entire kingdom to hear. You betrayed your people. You prolonged suffering. You profited from hatred. Neither man denied it. The court waited for a death sentence. Instead, Victor continued, there will be no executions. Gasps echoed through the hall. You will spend the rest of your lives rebuilding every village destroyed by this conflict. You will restore every orphanage abandoned by war. You will care for wounded soldiers from every kingdom. You will honor every promise your greed destroyed. The silence that followed carried more weight than any execution. Justice without vengeance, accountability without cruelty. Naomi looked at Victor with quiet pride, not because he had spared his enemies, because he had finally become the king she had always believed he could be. Outside the palace, church bells rang across the capital, not to celebrate another military victory, but to announce something the kingdom had almost forgotten was possible. Peace. 7 days after the final battle, the royal citadel no longer echoed with speeches celebrating conquest. Instead, its gates stood open, widows entered without fear, veterans walked beside former enemies. Children from every kingdom laughed together in the palace gardens where soldiers had once drilled for war. The throne room had changed as well. The banners of Ironclaw still hung proudly above the great hall, but beside them now flew the silver crescent standard that had once been quietly stitched onto blankets, grain sacks, and medicine crates. The symbol no longer belonged to one Luna. It belonged to an entire generation that had survived because she refused to hate. Representatives from every neighboring kingdom gathered before the High Moon Council. Former rivals stood shoulder to shoulder. No guards separated them. No swords were drawn. Only Elder Rowan Whitefur stepped forward, carrying an ancient silver circlet adorned with intertwined wolves beneath a single crescent moon. He raised his voice. For generations, kings believed peace could be enforced. They were mistaken. It was earned. He turned toward Naomi. You crossed borders without demanding loyalty. You kept promises after treaties failed. You protected strangers before they became allies. Today, the continent honors not only a Luna, but the woman whose mercy accomplished what armies never could. Naomi approached wearing the same simple blue-gray dress she had always preferred. She had refused jewels. She had refused elaborate royal robes. She wished to stand before the people exactly as she had stood before forgotten widows, wounded soldiers, and hungry children, as herself. Elder Rowan gently placed the silver circlet upon her head. Naomi Silverbrook, from this day forward, you shall forever be remembered as the Luna of peace. The entire hall rose to its feet. Kings bowed, queens bowed, generals bowed. Even the rival chieftains who had once sworn vengeance lowered their heads with quiet gratitude. Victor watched the moment in silence. Then he stepped beside his Luna, not in front of her. Beside her, he addressed every ruler gathered within the chamber. I once believed fear created loyal subjects. My Luna taught me that compassion creates faithful friends. From this day forward, Ironclaw will measure its greatness not by the lands it conquers, but by the lives it protects. The declaration echoed throughout the hall. No one applauded immediately. The silence itself carried the weight of history. Then, one by one, every ruler struck a closed fist against their heart in the ancient salute of mutual honor. Not to Victor, not even to Naomi, but to the future they had chosen together. Outside, the orphaned children whom Naomi had spent years protecting released dozens of white doves into the bright morning sky. The birds circled above the palace before disappearing toward every kingdom beyond the horizon. As this story comes to an end, one question remains. If you had suffered because of war for your entire life, would you still choose to show mercy to the people who once called themselves your enemies? Or would forgiveness be asking too much? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more unforgettable werewolf romance stories, where courage, redemption, and compassion reshape the destiny of kingdoms. Until our next journey beneath the moon, may your greatest strength always be the kindness you choose to give.